Arcadia is the metadata coordinator at Stanford Libraries for Digital Collections, and she's been the Wikidata Workshop Working Group leader since its inception over a year ago.
Thank you, Liam. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so first, before I begin, I would like to pause to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Oakland, California, which occupies the lands of the Ohlone people. We remember their continued connection to this region and offer our respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people of the past and present. In June 2019, Stanford Libraries started a Wikidata Working Group for staff to learn more about working with Wikidata. I'm here to share with you what we did, what we learned, what we're doing next, and what we can all do together. So first, what we did and who we are. The Wikidata Working Group's population fluctuated, especially at the start, but soon settled on about 10 regulars, mostly metadata librarians. We were also fortunate to have Hilary Thorson, the LD4 Wikimedian in residence, based at Stanford. The working group began meeting for an hour each week, following the precedent of a previous BibFrame study group at Stanford. At the beginning, the meetings focused on skill-building exercises, emphasizing hands-on work, problem-solving discussions based on members' questions, and building understanding of relevant Wikidata policies, as well as of the Wikidata ethos in general. As the group evolved, we spent more of the meeting time on activities such as developing data models, application profiles, and vocabulary lists, learning how to use OpenRefine for batch uploads, and working on projects, both shared and individual. More about those later. Why a Wikidata Working Group? Stanford librarians were already investigating lightweight ways to create URIs for people and organizations, including participating in an ISNI pilot. Building competency in Wikidata was a logical next step. Also, Stanford library developers had built a prototype discovery platform that leveraged Wikidata to enhance catalog data. This relied on the data, especially LC and AF identifiers, being present in Wikidata in the first place. So working to improve the coverage and quality of this data would benefit future discovery developments. In my role as coordinator of the group, I had some ideas about how the group might work, but also really wanted to take direction from the group members' interests. I did start with a list of possible topics for the group to cover, but rather than a set curriculum, the group progressed organically. Each meeting would usually point to where we should go next. Other components of my role involved researching answers to questions, developing documentation, scraping data from university websites, analyzing data, writing SPARQL queries, and keeping track of metrics. In essence, my focus was on three things: promoting group cohesion, doing preparation work so that participants could make more progress in Wikidata during the time we had together in the meetings, and sharing via our Wiki project page information that similar groups elsewhere might find useful. Over the past year, the members of the group have worked on a variety of projects. First, some of the shared projects we've worked on collaboratively. One strand of work, as I've mentioned, centered on LC and AF identifiers in Wikidata. This work started at our very first meeting with adding LC and AF IDs to items for Stanford faculty. We also took on remediation of identifiers already in Wikidata. SPARQL queries identified cases where two different Wikidata items had the same LC and AF identifier. Then we tried to determine whether the items represented the same person or two different ones. If they were the same, we merged the items. If they were different, in the simplest case, we could deprecate the incorrect identifier. In more challenging cases, a single item conflated information about two different people. Identifiers are especially vulnerable to this problem of misassignment, and not just because of human error. Many identifiers are added by bots, automated programs that derive additional data from what is already present on the item. For example, if an item has a VOF identifier and the VOF record has links to the corresponding identifiers in ISNI and FAST, a bot might add the ISNI and FAST identifiers from VOF to the item. If the item has the wrong VOF identifier to begin with, it could result in a bot assigning additional incorrect identifiers to the item in Wikidata. Remediating these errors improves Wikidata's utility as a hub for identifiers from different sources. An ongoing major project is to ensure that all current Stanford faculty have items and description in Wikidata. This project took a great deal of discussion and planning before we could start actually entering data. Here are some of the issues we faced and how we addressed them. First, we had to get a list of current faculty. For this, we used a couple of scripts to download the HTML from the faculty profile directory and extract names, departments, and links to individual profile pages. Second, we needed to come up with data models and application profiles, not just for faculty, but also for departments, professorships, and other associated entities. This involved identifying potential properties and values, selecting and prioritizing the ones we wanted to use, assembling vocabulary lists for values like academic disciplines, and mapping Stanford job titles to terms in Wikidata. We also had to decide how to structure the data, such as whether a particular piece of information would make more sense as its own statement or as a qualifier to another statement. All this work is documented on the Stanford Library's WikiProject site, which I'll link to in the last slide. Next was figuring out the order of operations for creating items. Since many values in the description of a faculty member are themselves Wikidata items, those items ideally must exist before you create the faculty member item. Otherwise, you'll have to return to update the faculty description each time you create a new relevant item, not the most efficient approach. So first we ensured that all of Stanford's schools and research centers had items, then added the departments and named professorships belonging to those schools, all before embarking on describing the faculty themselves. Then we had to actually create the descriptions of the faculty. For this, we sorted the faculty members by department, and members of the group working on the project claimed particular departments. Each person worked through creating description for the faculty members in that department, according to the data model and application profile we had developed. We chose this approach because one of the primary information sources was department web pages, so organizing the work in this way meant less clicking around and jumping from department to department. Some group members preferred to work directly in Wikidata, while others chose to create data in a spreadsheet to batch load into Wikidata using OpenRefine. For the latter, mapping, reconciling, and loading the data were also part of creating the Wikidata description. As a final flourish, some group members ran the faculty they worked on through the author disambiguation tool created by Magnus Mansky, which I'll also link to in the last slide. This tool identifies article items in Wikidata with author name strings matching a search term and facilitates replacing those name strings with the appropriate Wikidata item. Instead of the name being simply a string of text on the article item, this process creates a relationship between the article and the author as entities, linked data. In addition to these collaborative projects, some individual members engaged in their own projects based on their areas of interest. One cataloger who was creating LC title authorities for films began adding those authority IDs to the corresponding items in Wikidata. Another cataloger was working on describing digitized theater posters for Yiddish plays and began mapping the interconnected networks of posters, plays, and people to Wikidata. Two metadata librarians from the Music Library and the Archive of Recorded Sound looked to Wikidata to deal with the variations in work numbers across the different editions of the Kerschel catalog of Mozart's works. They focused on ensuring that all versions of the work numbers were in Wikidata and that each number was linked to the appropriate edition. A couple of librarians interested in special collections took on adding the archives at property to people and organizations whose archives Stanford holds. And finally, a digital archivist experimented with using Wikidata to create URIs for different software versions. So that's what we did. Next, what we learned from doing it. First, what we learned about Wikidata. There are multiple ways to do things, and that's okay. Many of us in the library world, especially catalogers and metadata librarians, are used to having explicit rules as to how to do things. Wikidata, not so much, and learning how to sit with the discomfort that lack of direction initially produced was part of the learning process. In practice, we dealt with this by investigating the different ways in use for expressing a particular statement and trying to determine the most common approach. We also consulted domain-specific wiki projects to see if they offered any guidelines about preferred patterns. Second, project documentation should ideally include not only what you're doing, but also why you chose to do it that way. Other Wikidata contributors have contacted me asking why I was deprecating rather than deleting incorrect identifiers. Having the explanation already put into words was useful and also helps others determine if your reasoning applies to their own projects. Third, Wikidata help pages are continually a work in progress. Early in the history of our group, I found an instance of an item that conflated two people, both named Gottfried Wilhelm Locher. I followed instructions I found in the Wikidata help pages for how to go about separating them, and was soon contacted by someone asking why I had done it that way. I pointed them to the documentation, and their reply was, "Oh, that's not really how to do it. Let me update that." And then that same person also identified 4 other Gottfried Wilhelm Lochers and helped make sure that all 6 were distinct from each other. Like everything else in Wikidata, the help pages are created and maintained by the community, and practices are always evolving. Some help pages are explicitly marked as a policy or a guideline, or as proposed or in process. In other cases, it may be helpful to check the discussion page to determine how much vetting and consensus building has gone into a document's current version and what other approaches are also being discussed. Fourth, words don't always mean what you think they mean. Wikidata is an international platform, and the same word may have different meanings in different places. So your vernacular interpretation of the term may be different from how it's defined in Wikidata. Additionally, there's no requirement that labels be unique, so the same term can be used multiple times with different meanings. We ran into this in particular with academic terms, where one item called lecturer referred to a tenured or tenure track position, while another item, also called lecturer, meant an adjunct teaching position. This is one of the reasons why we found it very useful to choose and document the terms we would use before starting a project. Property pages are also especially useful as they may contain usage instructions, examples, and constraints. For both properties and items, the discussion page may contain additional context. It can also be helpful to look at the item or property's relation to other elements. When we were deciding between parent organization and part of as properties for relating schools to the university, learning that parent organization was a sub-property of owned by tipped us toward using part of for that relationship. Finally, creating data is not the only Wikidata skill. Using the interface to enter statements is only a small part of what we have learned over the course of the working group. Other skills in play include constructing SPARQL queries, using the MediaWiki Markdown syntax for creating documentation, and using tools such as OpenRefine for reconciling and batch loading data. Through developing familiarity with Wikidata, we were able to build our skills out in other directions as well. Next, what we learned about what worked well for the Wikidata Working Group. First, having a regular weekly meeting time was very beneficial. The danger with any kind of study group is that you'll forget everything from the last meeting by the time the next one rolls around. The regular meetings facilitated ongoing skill building, as did developing projects that members could work on outside of the meeting time. The weekly format also meant that missing one meeting didn't put you as much out of the loop as it might have been if meetings were less frequent. Second, keeping the format flexible worked well. The group meetings ranged from an hour of active discussion to an hour of working quietly and asking questions as they came up. This allowed time for people to process and practice what they were learning. Third, having a variety of projects was appreciated. People were able to choose to work on something aligned with their interests and to switch between projects to explore different aspects of Wikidata. Fourth, creating librarian-oriented documentation was helpful. Translating general instructions to library terms in the context of our own projects provided a solid framework for people to refer to as they became more experienced with these processes. And finally, keeping track of metrics provides an added bonus. We use a tool called Event Metrics and generate reports out of that data to share on the Stanford Library's WikiProject page. Sadly, this tool counts some bulk loads as a single action, so the results undercount the actual efforts. But I can tell you that as of June 30th, 2020, members of the Stanford Wikidata Working Group had created at least 2,096 items, improved at least 9,861 more, and made more than 22,475 total edits. So what's next for the Stanford Wikidata Working Group? First, we're going to continue to work on ongoing projects, both shared and individual, and start some new ones. We're taking the summer off from meeting, but as many of us continue working from home part or full time, we'd like to figure out how to do working quietly in the same room, only remotely. We're thinking about how we might integrate Wikidata into our day-to-day workflows and use it to support our regular library work. We're tracking developments around leveraging Wikidata for library discovery to shape where we focus our efforts in future. And we're also looking to explore how Wikidata might intersect with our use of developing tools like LD4 Sinopia and ShareVDE's JCricket. We'd also love to connect with others interested in Wikidata. As you probably know, the LD4 Wikidata Affinity Group, WikiProject page, and Slack channels, Wikidata and Practical Wikidata, are existing vehicles for communication. There's also the PCC Wikidata pilot that is just starting up and is open to all, and the deadline for that is today. Whenever I've had the chance to chat about Wikidata with people at other institutions, it's been really rewarding. So another possibility is some kind of regular informal meetup to share ideas and swap tips. Speaking of sharing, making any documentation, data models, SPARQL queries, or project recipes that you've created available to others contributes to developing a cultural heritage community of practice. And one more thing to think about is how we might make opportunities to train the trainers in order to foster a broader dissemination of expertise across institutions. So that's a year in the life of the Stanford Libraries Wikidata Working Group, what we did, what we learned, what we're doing next, and what we might do together. So thank you for your attention, and thanks also to Jackie and Liam for facilitating. And now I will click over to the questions.
Thank you, Arcadia. There are currently 5 questions, possibly growing. So there were only a couple of minutes ago, and they've suddenly more than doubled. So that's excellent. Obviously, you were not able to answer them during the presentation, so there are a small handful of people who are eagerly awaiting your response when you can get around to it.
Sure. So the first question is, did you consider submitting feedback to bots that added incorrect identifiers? Would that be a viable approach worth the trouble? We did not. We did notice some patterns of more so with bots that would create new items rather than reconciling with existing items. But we didn't actually contact any of the creators of those bots. Did you consider asking academic departments for spreadsheets of faculty data rather than creating those yourselves? No, we did not. We wanted to get something quick and complete. And so we just wrote the scripts to be able to get the information out of the profile websites. Did you get Stanford institutional buy-in before proceeding with the faculty project, or did you just go ahead and tell others about it later? I've been doing some work in this area at our institution, and I've been debating whether or not to reach out to the provost's office to get institutional support. We have not yet. We did review the Wikidata Living People policy before we embarked on this project, but we haven't yet reached out. One of the things we're thinking about working on next is in conjunction with some work we're doing on faculty advisors for electronic theses and dissertations. And so with those different activities merging together, that might be a point where we'll expand beyond our library focus. Related to above, were there any issues you encountered with whether to add data like birth date or gender for faculty? The information, since we were working from the department web pages primarily and the profile pages, their birth date wasn't usually a piece of information that we had. And since we were working from public information, and especially with the profile pages, were information that faculty members had created to share about themselves, we felt comfortable using that information. Gender we did talk about a lot. And what we settled on is if the faculty member uses a pronoun to refer to themselves in the profile information that they created, then we would enter gender, but otherwise we would have that be a very optional part of our data model. What kind of workflows are you exploring Wikidata integration for? Electronic theses and dissertations, as I mentioned. We've been creating LC name authorities for primary advisors, and I believe other advisors as well, and are interested in doing some more work to kind of explore the different networks in between advisors and students and topics. And we're also going to be participating in the PCC Wikidata pilot and doing some work there around expanding the posters project to a collection of Middle Eastern film posters that we're working on cataloging. And let's see, there was, and then also, as I said, with Sinopia and JCricket, we're just starting to think about, especially with JCricket, how Wikidata might intersect with bringing those two tools online into our production workflows. Let's see. I noticed that you didn't include, or actually, sorry, am I out of time? Do I need to stop?
You're fine.
Okay. I noticed that you didn't include the NAF LCCN and the department records in Wikidata. Are you going to link these items to the NAF ID? We did have that as part of our data model. Not all departments had NAFs, and also there were issues with departments changing over time and splitting and merging, and so we didn't always include that. But when we could, it was certainly something that we considered. Yes, could you describe why you deprecate rather than delete bad identifiers? I started out deleting, and then at some point, I think it was actually the Gottfried Wilhelm Locher, I went back and someone had re-added an incorrect identifier. And so I decided to start deprecating instead, partly to make sure that people didn't mistakenly re-add incorrect identifiers. And also because it's possible to include a qualifier of the reason for deprecation. And so I could enter whether it was applied to the wrong person or if the identifier itself, like the VOF record, was a completion of two people. And so it was a way of also sort of recording issues in other, at the identifier source as well as within Wikidata itself. Let's see. And yes, I'm sharing the orientation materials. Everything we have is linked from the Stanford Libraries WikiProject, so that's a good place to start. And as I said, because it sort of grew organically, I have the list of topics we started with, but we ended up sort of taking a more meandering route. I do have a section in the WikiProject on getting started that has things about setting up an account and which widgets are useful and some basic information about familiarizing yourself with Wikidata. But we did also make use of the official standard Wikidata tutorials that are available via their help pages.
I think when this sentence is typed out, this will have to be our last question.
Did you have a chance to assess the experience and gathered lessons learned? Yes, we kind of periodically checked in at our meetings and talked about how things were going for people, what they were working on, what issues they were facing, what things they were interested in exploring further. So that was kind of an ongoing process. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Arcadia. If anyone wants to add further questions and interact with her, please continue to do so on the Q&A document. There's no need to stop writing there as we continue on with our next session. That's perfectly fine. Thank you once again. And now back to Jackie for some administrative information as we go into our third and final session for this, the last session of the Wikidata track, which is the last session of the entire conference, if I'm correct.
I believe so. So we will be ending this session right here using the Zoom webinar. We'll be switching gear as we're getting ready for a collaborative editing exercise for about an hour. So the easiest way is for you to go to the sketch link that provides the Zoom information. And in addition, there's event page link here as well as the slides that Hillary will be sharing. So on that, I'll be stopping the sharing and stopping the recording and exiting everybody.